Sex cells. And sex cells are eggs and sperm. So remember, the egg cell is the female cell, and the sperm is the male cell. These are also called gametes. So eggs and sperm are gametes. So egg is also called an oocyte. Sperm, sometimes we call it spermatocyte. Half as many genes as other cells, because these two are going to come together during fertilization. And then when they come together, you have a full set of genes. So this is like half a deck of cards, this is like half a deck of cards. Come together, you get the full deck. Form a zygote. So a zygote is a fertilized egg. Half of the DNA is going to come from the mother, the egg cell, half the DNA from the sperm cell, the father. So if we're just looking at one gene, let's say, for example, we're going to look at one gene. We're just going to call it Z, the gene Z. Remember, in our cells we have two sets of the gene. So in our cells, we're either big Z, little z, little z, little z, or big Z, let's say. We're just making up the gene for Z. In sex cells have half as much DNA as other cells. So they only have one gene. They only have one form of the gene. They don't have two. So they either have a big Z or a little z. They don't have both. They don't have one of each. They have only one. So let's say the egg cell is a big Z, and the sperm cell is little z. So when they come together during fertilization to form a zygote, the zygote has a big Z, little z. So this makes sense. Half of your DNA comes from your mother. So for this gene, half from the mother, half from the father. So sex cells are called haploid cells. Think of haploid. They have half of the amount of DNA as other cells. In other words, they have only one copy of each gene. And that makes sense because during fertilization, they combine with the other sex cell and form a full copy. Cells that have two sets of genes are called diploid. Diploid cells are non-sex cells. So all other cells in your body, except for eggs if you're female and sperm if you're a male, are diploid. They have two sets of every gene, or two copies of the genes. So one from mother, one from father. But this is how it happened. This is why we have two copies. So if we're just looking at the gene Z, let's say the big Z comes from mom, little z comes from dad. The zygote then is big Z, little z. Now we all start off as a zygote. And then this zygote is going to divide into two cells. And then those two cells are going to divide. And then those cells divide. And pretty soon you get a ball of cells. And then it keeps dividing, cells keep dividing and form an embryo. Like the fetus, the baby. All right, so this is why these sex cells have half of the amount of DNA. So once a zygote is formed, remember zygote's the fertilized egg, it's going to divide, make more cells. And those cells are all clones of each other. Okay? Cell division, which really is when cells multiply. So they're making more cells. We call it cell division. Is called mitosis. So mitosis means cells are divided. So you start with one cell, and you end up with two cells. And these cells are the same. So let's go back to the gene Z. Let's say this has big Z, little z. Then this one has big Z, little z, and this one has big Z, little z. So they're identical. So this is the parent, sometimes just called parent cell, and these are the daughter cells. So they don't call them son cells, they call them daughter cells. So the daughter cells This is the parent. Now, there are many phases the cell goes through to become two cells. You're not going to have to memorize the phases. But during this process, though, the DNA also has to replicate. It's got to make more DNA. And we learned about DNA replication. So now we have two cells from the original. And then these cells are going to divide. And they're going to produce clones of each other. So these cells are all the same. And this is what happens when after a zygote is made. The zygote replicates, goes through cell division. So more and more cells are being made. So we started off as one fertilized egg. We started off as a zygote, but now we're made of trillions of cells. But how did we get to trillions of cells from a zygote? Process of mitosis. Because the cells keep dividing. So now these two, each one of these divides and so forth. Okay, so then this one produces. And they're all the same. Okay, again, I'm just showing the Z, big Z, little z, as a gene. So we have two forms of a gene, remember, except for sex cells that have one form. So each of these then is going to divide. And they're all the same. And this keeps going and going. So now these divide, and so forth. Mitosis. Okay, so they're clones of each other. Now, when eggs and sperm are made, there's a difference. So all sperm is not the same, and all eggs do not have the same genes. And this is what really leads to genetic variation. Because if all sperm cells and egg cells were made by mitosis, we'd all be clones of each other, right? We'd all be the same. But sperm and egg cells are not made from mitosis. They're not made by cloning cells, because we'd all be the same.